Theological Seminary. He also served as Director of Education at Harvard Hillel. In 2011, he was a recipient of the prestigious Covenant Award for Excellence in Jewish Education. Rabbi Held has been named multiple times to Newsweek's list of the 50 most influential rabbis in America. He holds a doctorate in religion from Harvard, and his main academic interests are in modern Jewish and Christian thought, in biblical theology, and in the history of Zionism. Rabbi Held's first book, Abraham Joshua Heschel, The Call of Transcendence, was published by Indiana University Press in 2013. The Heart of Torah, a collection of essays on the Torah in 2 volumes, was published by JPS in 2017. And I highly recommend you get them. And he is currently at work on a book entitled Judaism is About Love. He lives in Westchester, New York, with his wife Rachel, a clinical psychologist, and their 3 children. I am so happy to present Rabbi Shai Held.
Thank you very much. Do I need a mic?
Yes.
Wow, that's the first time I've ever seen a room of Jews unanimous about anything. It was amazing. It was an extraordinary moment.
Get close to the mic. Get the mic close to you.
Get close to the mic.
Yeah.
We're all about closeness here in Jewish Renewal, right?
Make friends.
Okay. You guys? Okay, great. Thank you. As I said last night to those of you who were here, really is truly a great honor for me to be here. Thank you for inviting me and for the really warm hospitality with which you greeted me. It really does mean a lot.
Can we up the mic level?
Up the mic level?
He's not in the mic yet. We're still working on it.
I'm sorry?
Will we be able to access the city sometime?
If everything works the way it's supposed to work.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
How's this? What does this actually say?
Mic 4.
This is like the nightmare I used to have about what would happen if I had a shul. So I wasn't planning on doing this, but you just reminded me, I'm sorry, of my favorite joke I ever heard from a Christian. You know that Christians often have Protestants, the greeting where the minister gets up and says, "Peace be with you," and the congregation responds, "And also with you." Are you familiar with this joke? No. So the minister, it's his first
Don't let us
Shabbos,
stop you.
it's his first Sunday morning, he gets up, and the microphone doesn't work. And he starts to panic, he's banging on the microphone, he's clapping, and finally he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's something wrong with this microphone." And they all say, "And also with you." I honestly have been waiting my whole life to tell the truth. So I titled this morning's presentation, Waiting for God. And I want to try to sort of explain a little bit about what that means. On the face of it, with apologies to those who were there last night, on the face of it, the ending of the Torah is really quite baffling. In fact, it is so familiar to most of us that we miss how baffling it really is. We've been reading the book of Deuteronomy, Sefer Dvarim, in which extensive and dramatic plans have been made for what an Israelite society will come to look like. God has made promises and threats. God has given an extensive set of laws for how to construct this society. And in many ways, the whole Torah has been about the journey to this place. By the way, that's why Heschel's famous midrash about Judaism is about time rather than space is a beautiful reading of Genesis 1 and a highly idiosyncratic reading of the Torah, right? If I handed you a Chumash and said, is this a religion of time or space, right? Is it so obvious to you that you'd say time? I don't think so, right? That's a discussion we could have sometime. All right, we're 1 minute in. I've only had one digression. It's not bad, right? So Deuteronomy, we're about to go. The whole point of the Torah, ostensibly, is about to be fulfilled, and then the Torah ends. Right? While Bnei Israel, while the Jewish people are still standing on the outside, looking in. Terence Fredheim, a well-known and well-respected contemporary biblical scholar, refers to Deuteronomy as an unfinished symphony. That it's supposed to leave you feeling like, wait a minute, I was waiting for this amazing ending, and then the orchestra walked off. What happened? Again, this is the danger, always, with texts becoming over-familiar, is that they lose their ability to shock us. Jonathan Lear, the philosopher and psychologist, has an amazing statement that the greatest obstacle to learning is knowing. Right? You can't learn anything if you know it already. Right? I always tell students who come to study at Hadar full time, the first thing, your avoda for the first time you're here is to defamiliarize yourself with all the texts you think you know by heart. Because you can't hear them anymore. Right? So Devarim is amazing in this way, and we need to, I think, take a step back and actually hear it. Which is, why do we get right to where we're trying to go and then call it a day and go home? Right? It's a very strange thing to do. As is well known, right, the Pesach Haggadah mimics the book of Deuteronomy, right? It mimics Devarim. We have, in this morning's Torah reading, the 5 languages of redemption that God speaks, for which Jews in our inimitable genius drink 4 cups of wine to commemorate 5 languages of redemption, right? The fifth language, the Heveti, right, disappears. And there are other ways in the Haggadah as well, when you cut off the passage in Deuteronomy, right? There are all kinds of ways where the Haggadah also is about going towards and not arriving. Now, there's a lot of things you can say about this. One of those things, which is commonly said, which is, I think, hovers between profundity and cliche, in all honesty, is an argument about the importance of the journey and not just the destination, right? That Judaism focuses also on the process of getting there and not just on where you're trying to end up. Now, I wrote about that in my recent book, The Heart of Torah, but I tried to end it in a way that was fascinating to me, that no one really, people who commented to me about the essay didn't really hear this part. What I tried to end by saying is, one should not hear that idea as Pollyanna or naive. The journey can be excruciating. People die on the journey. And the end of Dvarim, I'm not sure the feeling is, yay, we're about to go in. There's a lot of anxiety. Will we be able to ever live up to what God expects of us? This lofty vision, is it possible? Right? So the journey is a journey, but it's not, we should avoid the temptation to make it a cliche. Always focusing on the journey and never having moments of arrival can actually be quite debilitating, dispiriting, right? It's very complex, actually, as a move. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But what I've come to realize since I wrote that essay is that I think in Devarim's own terms, something else is going on, which may be related, but is not the same thing. And that is that Devarim is keenly aware that for a truly faithful person, for a believer, we have no choice but to live in an extended period of not yet. We are forced to live in a profound, and again I want to underscore this point, often excruciating period of not yet. It's worth noting the historical circumstances under which Deuteronomy comes to be this way, right? Many, and some of you were shocked last night when I mentioned this quickly, many biblical scholars, ad hayom hazeh, to this very day, believe that the Torah was originally 6 books, a hexateuch. That is, it began with Breshit Aleph, and it ended at the end of Sefer Yehoshua. Those of you who are interested in biblical criticism, you can look at, I brought you here, this is really only for your enjoyment. James Sanders, a kind of well-regarded source critic, I brought you a passage from his book, Torah and Canon, where he tries to explain why this decision was made. There are even people in biblical scholarship who believe there was originally one book that was what is now Torah and Nevi'im Rishonim, That is to say, it began in Genesis 1 and ended with the last verses of 2 Kings. And at a certain point, and the point is worth thinking about, at a certain point, a decision was made. I'm using that third person passive because it's hard to identify exactly who did it. A decision was made to cut the text off and end it on the border, on the boundary of the land. Right? A decision was made, okay? Now, there's two rough possibilities of exactly when and why that happened. They're related to each other. One is, if you imagine that Deuteronomy is in some way already thinking about exile, because for people living in exile, reading a book that's all about celebrating arrival in the land can feel hollow at best and almost, this is not the right word, I'm struggling for the right word, but almost insulting at worst. It's not the word, but hollow and I don't know what exactly. Humiliating maybe is a word I'm looking for, I'm not sure, right? There's something that's kind of off about that. But it's even more complex than that, and the building of the Second Temple was kind of anticlimactic. It's like they built a shul and called it a Beit HaMikdash, right? It was small. American Jews were not the first people who were ever given an opportunity to live in the land of Israel and chose not to, right? Basically, the Israelites are given permission to go home, and in massive numbers they don't. If you read the chapters of Isaiah that are referred to by academics as third Isaiah, Yeshayahu Shlishi, they're basically about, we're back, this is what we came back for? Really? This looks like an old rundown Makolet in Afula. This is not God. This is not the redeemed land. What is this? Right? What is that? Thank you. So either it's exile, or it's the disappointment when return is anticlimactic, or not what it was, cut out to be. By the way, we now think that there may have been deep conflict when those who returned, between those who returned and thought they were in charge and those who had been there all along and thought they should be in charge. There's a lot to say about that. Okay, now, if you would be willing to look for a minute on the second page of your packet, I want to just leave you with this. We're going to transition now from history to actually kind of getting how this might hit us and land with us. The third passage here, sort of a contemporary, sort of a liberal Protestant Bible scholar named Clinton McCann, by making the canonical division after Deuteronomy and before Joshua, the effect is to leave the people of God perpetually outside the land, thus perpetually unsettled. The book of Deuteronomy ends with the people of God camped on the plains of Moab, still waiting to enter the land. This canonical shaping was quite intentional and very important. The unsettledness has the effect of leaving the people of God perpetually in a position of waiting. Hence my waiting for God piece, right? What does it mean to inherit and build an entire, massive edifice upon a text that is about not yet? Take one step forward, and then we'll kind of take stock of this. One of the reasons why this matters so much is that Judaism, after all, is not about a set of abstract propositions about the way the world is, right? But rather, or at least primarily, about a set of dreams of what the world could yet look like, right? There's not usually a list of metaphysical assumptions, although they may well be metaphysical assumptions underlying it, but it is about a set of dreams. In one of Rav Kook's most amazing essays, it begins, a text that I totally love, HaChalomot HaGdolim Yisod HaOlam Hem. The great dreams are the foundation of the world, so beautifully counterintuitive. We often think of dreams as, right, Horchim Ba'avir, as, how do you say that in English? They're kind of floating around in the air, right? And he actually says, no, dreams are the very foundation on which human history happens, right? HaChalomot HaGdolim Yisod HaOlam Hem. They are the very dreams. They are the very foundations on which Judaism builds itself. And that matters because those dreams not only remain unfulfilled, but also because, I think if we're honest about it, and I'll try to make this a little more concrete in a few minutes, reality often makes a mockery of the dreams we hold most dear. right? It doesn't just not fulfill our dreams, it makes us feel ridiculous about those dreams and depressed about there being possibility of their fulfillment. Remember when Francis Fukuyama 35 years ago talked about history coming to an end because democracy had won? Right? It's kind of amazing, these moments where people believe they're there and then they're not there. I think of Francis Fukuyama, his critics, as a kind of third Isaiah. Oh yeah? This is what you talked about as the fulfillment of history? That? Right? Think about Rosh Hashanah for a moment. The incredible complexity of Rosh Hashanah, right? And it really is so profoundly complex, is how do we at the one and the same time proclaim traditionally that God is the sovereign ruler of the world and that God will one day yet become the sovereign ruler of the world? Well, which one is it? Right? And there's something about living with that, right? On one level, if you're going to say that God is God, well then God is God. On another level, God is not God yet. By the way, that's called Aleinu. Right? Melech Malchem Malchim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bayom HaHu Yeh Adonai Echad V'Shmo Echad. Right? On that day, it is not true yet. It is a dream that is not yet fulfilled. Right? And that's the structure of the Chumash itself. It is about a dream, a journey, an attempt to get somewhere that is not yet real. And the Torah, by the way, is anything but naive about human nature and how hard we make it for ourselves. Right? I mean, that's actually, I think, quite profound. The ways in which the Torah is ever alert to some of our best qualities, like stubbornness, refusal to grow, refusal to open ourselves up, refusal to trust, acquisitiveness because we don't trust. There's just so much there. So, crucially, to take Rosh Hashanah seriously, to take Torah seriously, is on some level to be willing to hope and to wait. So questions, I think, of course, are hoping for what and waiting for what, and also what do I do on a day when I'm hoping, which we'll come to in just a minute. But what is the dream? I drink a lot, but Denver is killing me. Yeah. So bear with me here. Okay, so obviously, if we want to think in biblical terms, right? The first level, and arguably you could argue the primary level of the messianic dream for the Bible is deeply particularistic. It is about the Jewish people being restored to the land. It is, as it were, reattaching Devarim to Yehoshua, able to live sovereignly and peacefully in their land. And now all I'm trying to do now is exegete Isaiah. I'm not trying to make any kind of bigger normative statement than that. Thank you. But then, and this is not some modern rabbi, I always like to say Isaiah was not a reform rabbi in 1857 Hamburg. Isaiah himself then says, right, this is part and parcel of a universal messianic dream of a reality utterly transformed. And I brought you in the passage in case you wanted to defamiliarize yourself so you could discover for the first time how shocking Isaiah 2 and Isaiah 11 really are in that way. Okay? Now, so there's both the Jewish people's redemption and a kind of cosmic transformation. In my own understanding, this is entirely my language, right? Judaism dreams of a world in which human dignity is real and the presence of God is manifest, right? A world in which human dignity is real and the presence of God is manifest. And the problem is that both of those claims, both of those dreams, are very hard to hold on to, right? There's two options people often face. This has been my experience over and over again, even in my own life, but also just watching college kids who I've spent much of my life working with, right? You either say, well, those things sound ridiculous, therefore I'll abandon the dream. Or you say, those things are so important to me, but reality is too hard to look at, therefore I'll abandon reality. Right? Or you find some way to live in the muddiness, I don't know what the right image here is, in the messiness, in the ugliness, in the pain, in the courage it takes to say, there is a chasm between the most fundamental things we care about and dream about and the reality we inhabit day after day, and somehow I'm going to find a way to inhabit that chasm. I'm going to live there. I'm going to live in that gap. Right? Now, I don't have to, I'm imagining that, in this day and age, I don't have to, flesh out the ways in which human history makes a mockery of that dream, but a world in which human dignity is real, right? We live in a world in which human dignity is trodden upon and trampled upon in almost unimaginable ways every day of our life. And I always feel it's important to say in contexts like this, that doesn't just mean, although it also surely means, right? It doesn't just mean things like global poverty. It means that. But it also means, I never know what goes on in any home of anyone, even my closest friends who are married to each other. I have no real idea what goes on when no one else is around. I don't know who talk to their kids how. I'd like to think I do, but I don't. I don't. When I think about the friends of mine whose marriages fell apart within a few months, I was almost always wrong about who I thought that would happen. No, I'm not saying that to be cute. I just mean, in other words, we just don't know. And there's a way, and by the way, one of the ways in which my own life, I make decisions all the time that keep human dignity trodden and trampled upon. I just received, and this is, whatever, I probably shouldn't even say this, but I just received in the same week from the camp and the school that my kids attend separately. They both sent a kind of, I guess, a reminder to sign your kid up for next year, and both of them sent Hershey bars. And so here, I want to say, I'm in the process of drafting a letter with them saying, look, I understand that living in Westchester County, I am now going to sound like a lunatic. But I'm wondering whether you might want to consider being sure that the chocolate you're sending from your Jewish school was not made by a slave. I'm wondering whether we want to have that conversation, right? Because for 50 cents more, you actually could have known something about where your food was coming from. So we all make decisions all the time that, continue the making of people, the making of human dignity seem like just words that we utter that couldn't possibly mean. And a world in which God's presence is manifest, we live in a world in which God seems, we can take our pick here, depending on who you are or what mood you happen to be in today. Absent, hidden, non-existent, and go on, right? And by the way, those two things are related, because to this day, obviously, one of the greatest obstacles for most people to believe in any kind of God, let alone a traditional God of some kind or another, is if you translate the problem of evil into more human terms, we might call it a problem of immense, unimaginable human suffering, which is not so far from a prolonged, never-relenting assault on human dignity. Right? So there's some way in which we live, at best, towards the end of Sefer Dvarim. At best. At best, we live towards the end of Sefer Dvarim, except, by the way, for one thing, which is not what I wanted to talk about, but Shefa said this to me this morning, and I wanted to just underscore this because I've been thinking about it since, right? The amazing claim of Shabbat is essentially that I can live inside of a messianic reality now, as long as it doesn't lead me to close my eyes to the other 6 days of the week and what they look like. Like, that's what Ein Olam Haba is. I mean, quite literally, that's what Chazal say you're doing, right? You're entering. By the way, I found it amazing when I was graduate school in study of religion and reading anthropologists theorizing about religion, that this kind of dominant notion, which I thought was an amazing description of Shabbat, is the idea that what religion is about is providing people with another world to live in temporarily. Right? Just think about it, it's amazing, right? Another world to live in temporarily. Clifford Geertz, famous anthropologist, recently passed away, enormously influential. He basically says that's what it means to be religious, is to be able to inhabit other realities that then transform the way I am when I return to my quotidian reality, into my day-to-day reality. Which is why, right, the real question of Shabbat ultimately is not Shabbat afternoon, but Tuesday afternoon, in some really profound way, which is how have I been altered by the process of inhabiting a different reality? And this is, by the way, very hard. First of all, from a gender perspective, men in the history of Judaism were able to inhabit a different reality because they had a built-in catering service called women. And also, there's a way in which it's right. I mean, I'm guessing I'm not the only person who knows this, it's Shabbat. I've just davened Kabbalah Shabbat. I'm in a different place, and then I notice that my kid is driving me crazy, and I'm not reacting any differently now than I did yesterday. And then I wonder, well, what am I doing? And then it feels like a fraud, and then we're off to the races, right? So there's a way in which this is actually very hard work, right? Which, ironically, requires a tremendously developed sense of forgiveness of the ways in which spiritual practice is also not perfect. Okay, so what is this? What do we do with this here? Okay? Living in a world in which we get to the end of Dvarim and stop. Or if you prefer, the tragic sensibility that somebody felt the need to lop it off, right? It's not that it's not there. It's that the pain was so deep that someone took a scissors to it. It's such a profound image to me, at least. So the first thing I want to mention, and this is almost going to sound cliche at this point. Look for a minute, if you would, at source 6, because we're going to come back to this at the end. This is almost a throwaway comment, or so it seems, in Sifra, the Midrash on Sefer Bamidbar. Abba Shaul says, Pamal Yelamelech, the king has a retinue. Uma aleha liyot, what must the retinue do? Mechakala melech, it must wait for the king. Which just amplifies this issue. What does this waiting consist of? So first, it consists of hoping. But the problem is, we have to do some unpacking about what we mean by hope, right? Which is not such a simple question. So first, let me say, just to kind of, for those of you who like biblical Hebrew, I was kind of uncertain whether waiting and hoping should be as equated as I was inclined to make them. So I just present you here, because I thought it was interesting when I stumbled upon this. Look for a second at two translations of Psalms 27, the Psalm for Elul and Yamim Noraim. Kave'el Hashem, Chazak v'yametz libecha, v'kave'el Hashem. So the NRSV, wait for the Lord, Kave'el Hashem, and the Common English Bible, hope in the Lord, right? And then, lest you think this is just a kind of thing about translators who can't decide what it means, you look at Psalm 39 and you see the psalmist saying, Vata ma kiviti Adonai tochalti lechahi, tikva and tochelet. The words you might be tempted to translate as waiting and hoping are used as interchangeable. They're synonyms. We could probably struggle in our own lives to maybe tease apart what we mean by waiting and hoping, but at very least, even already in the Bible, those two terms are deeply intertwined, I think. Okay? So hope. I want to, if I could, take a couple of minutes to take you on what is going to seem totally obscure, but I actually feel like it captures, the heart of a certain kind of Jewish spiritual courage that I want to look at for a minute. And just to say one meta sentence, I think it's interesting that many people have tried to rediscover the heart of the Jewish tradition. Have felt the need to do that through Kabbalistic and Hasidic sources. For many reasons, almost all of them legitimate. But one of the things that I find personally really interesting, that was probably less of a rich throwaway than I meant it to. I'm happy to talk to anyone about what I mean by that. It's not earth-shattering. But one of the things that I personally am interested in is what would happen if we read the Bible and Chazal with genuinely fresh eyes. And let go of, for those of you who was like your fourth grade Chumash teacher who made it seem deadly and threatening, or, Hebrew school, which, whatever, right? So, look for a minute. I was going to give you an example. I find this so moving. And if you think I'm crazy, that's fine too. The end of Melachim Bet. Okay? Remember, some people think this was originally the end of the original Torah, as it were. Now, just so we understand what's going on here, the kingdom of Judah is defeated and destroyed. The king and many of those around him have been exiled. From the perspective of what scholars call the Deuteronomic history, Israel has been unfaithful to God God has exacted an enormous price, and what? And what? It's over now? And what? So look at the end of Melachim for a minute. So first, we're not going to. The few psukim at the beginning, and they're in English on the next page. That's easier. Is about the actual processing of exile. But then, I really, for here, just want to read the last 4 words. Vayigel Yehuda me'al admato. And Judah was exiled from its land. Now, on many levels, one would expect that to be the end of Sefer Melachim. It's over, right? Now, 2 things then happen. One that points to what a difficult people we are, and one that points to, I think, how spiritually courageous we can be. The first is that a puppet is chosen to rule those Israelites, Judahites, who remain. His name is Gedaliah. He is then assassinated, right? But, so you expect it to end then, right? It's not just the exile, it's that even those people who stay eat each other alive, right? But no. What happens at the very end is this, okay? Vayehi b'shloshim v'sheva shana, 37 years after Yehoiachin, the king, is sent into exile, Shneimosar Chodesh, etc., V'esrim v'shiva l'chodesh, right, in the 27th day of the 12th month, Nasa Evil Merodach, this is the Babylonian Empire. I always feel like this should be a character in an Austin Powers movie. It's Evil is in all these translations written E-V-I-L hyphen Merodach, evil Merodach. Okay, so Evil Merodach, Melech Bavel, right? Bishnat Molcho, at the year when he becomes king, he raises Nasa et Rosh Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda mi Beit Keled. He, whatever this means, some debates about this, he raises the head, that is something, he elevates him in some way out of prison. Vayidaber ito tovot, he speaks kindly to him. Some people think this means he made a covenant with him, based on other ancient Near Eastern uses of the phrase Vayidaber tov. Vayitain et kiso me'al kisei hamlachim asher ito beBavel. So the king has lots of living trophies, the Babylonian king, all these kings of places he's captured, and they're all living under a kind of house arrest, and he takes the Judahite 37 years later, right, and says, you know what, you can be the first among deportees. V'shina et bigdei kil'o, and he gives him different clothes, v'achal lechem tamid lefanav kol yemei chayav, and he would eat in the king's actual house. Aruchato, arukhat tamid nitna lo me'et hamelech, v'yom yomo kol yemei chayav. A kind of stipend of food, an allowance of food was given to him day after day at the command of the king. Now ends Sefer Melachim. Now, here's the thing that, and I don't think this is actually midrashic, what I'm about to say. I mean, if it is, that's great, but I don't think it is. I think it's actually the pshat, okay? So, people, historians, who took a bleak look at Nevi'im Rishonim said, this is just sort of, we have one piece of historical information about Yoachim, so we included it at the end. This, to me, is quite tone deaf, right? Because it seems to me much more likely that what's going on, and I gave you a couple of examples of modern Bible scholars, Richard Nelson, Walter Brueggemann, who make versions of this argument, right? That what's happened is that somehow there is a need. It takes 37 years, and it is not utter transformation. It is not yet returned to the land. There's no glory here, but there is the slightest inkling that it will again be otherwise. The king has been elevated a little bit. The king has been acknowledged. The Israelite kingdom is not destroyed forever, it's destroyed for now. Now this may seem strange, but I see this as a profound act of, you can decide, faith or resistance. I mean, you don't have to decide between those things necessarily. In fact, never mind. But the point is that right, there's something I think that's quite powerful here about the sort of refusal to allow defeat to have the last word, but also the refusal to become delusional about what is not now the case. Right? In other words, you could imagine a different thing that said after 56 years, right, this person was said, no, that's not how it ends. There was the slightest hint of elevation. Right? The slightest glimmer of possibility emerges. Now, I literally almost chose this example at random because I could choose many Nevi'im Achronim, many of the later prophets. I mean, Jeremiah, for a long time, people talk about Jeremiah as the ultimate prophet of doom. And yet what's amazing about Jeremiah is in the middle of these like assaults of doom, all of a sudden, he'll start dreaming about what the world can one day look like. Right? There's something about the stubborn relentlessness of hope that is, I think, incredibly powerful in these texts. And if, in fact, we're supposed to, on some degree, personalize text, I want to be clear. On some degree, personalizing does not mean just personalizing. That's the danger of the whole Hasidic thing, right? The great underside of the whole Hasidic project is the danger that it becomes all about me. What is Pesach? I'm going to become less angry at my mom. That's no small shakes, but that's not all it's about. And you have this battle consciously and unconsciously playing out among Hasidic generations also, right? Where you have certain places where it becomes deeply personalized. By the way, when you have no historical power, it's easier to become deeply personalized. What is it you want to transform exactly outside, right? But to inherit that kind of tradition in a time when you have enormous political power and only focus on personal transformation is to run the risk of all spiritual traditions, which is basically turn them all into tools to further my, self-involvement, whatever it might be. Now, just to be clear, the goal, I think, is for them not to be mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing, right? I transform myself into the kind of person who cares not only about myself, right? I understand that healing myself and healing the world are intertwined, but that is much easier said than done, by the way. It doesn't tell you what decision to make about next Tuesday afternoon. It really doesn't. Right? Those are hard, those remain hard things to figure out. But if we're supposed to take this to some degree personally, I think there's something worth saying here about what does it mean to hope, but if I could be kind of granted a phrase here, to hope in a sober way. That's what I understand going on at the end of Malachim. It's sober hope. It's not delusional hope. It's like, okay. And by the way, it takes a while. Imagine if I told you everything has fallen apart, but don't worry. 37 years from today, you will start to feel better. I'm saying that, and I'm not trying to be flip. There's something about what's really important, I think, about this gap of time. It's a long time. Think about those of you who are old enough to do this. Think about yourself 37 years ago and yourself now. It's a long time. It's really a long time. So again, there's hope here, but it doesn't simply override reality. It tries to inject possibility into reality. By the way, I came upon this thing recently that blew me away, and I understand, I want to just sort of acknowledge, these are very painful texts for a lot of people for very obvious reasons, I hope. But I was reading a book called Lev Eliyahu, which is the drashot of, the Musar shmuzes of Rabbi Eliyahu Lopian, who was known as Reb Elia, one of the prominent Musar teachers in Israel in the 20th century. He says this totally beautiful thing. He says, why is it so important to Breshit? To have the whole covenant begin with a moment of prolonged infertility? Because part of what it will mean to be Am Yisrael is to again and again stare at situations that are utterly hopeless and say, it is possible. It's like really arresting. Now again, I have major misgivings about those kinds of texts in this day and age in terms of how they hurt people, right? So I want to just sort of, I hear you, right? But there are other places you could turn to, but it's such an amazing piece there, I think, the sort of acknowledgement that there's good grounds for hopelessness in the world, and that's really important to say, right? Being tempted by hopelessness is not necessarily a sign of something that you need clinical help with. It might be, but I don't know. I kind of feel like if you read the New York Times every day for a week closely, right? Yeah. So, I said I wouldn't talk about politics, so I'm not. Of course, but I am, but I'm not. So, now, I want to give you another example of this. By the way, if you, Nelson and Brueggemann both write very beautifully about this text in very Christian ways, although I feel like we could learn a little bit about how to not be inhibited in certain kinds of language. In a very different mode, but related, turn for a minute to source 14. So I want to show you an example of that's like personal, right? What do I do, okay? So Lamentations chapter 3, if you've never learned this closely, I would actually recommend buying like a religiously sensitive academic commentary, because it's such an amazing emotional roller coaster. We're talking about a text about trauma and the emotional processing of trauma. Self-blame, hope, utter despair, rage, it's all in there, in this amazing soup. Va'omar avad nitzchi v'tochalti me Hashem. I said to myself, my strength and hope had perished before the Lord. Now here, biblical Hebrew is amazing because there's a kind of almost a pun here. Avad nitzchi v'tochalti me Hashem means both before the Lord, but because of the Lord. God took away my hope. You read the 3rd chapter of Eichel, I think that's obviously intended here, right? I lost my hope because of you. We'll come back to that in a moment. But then, 2 verses later, after the declaration that it's all over, everything is ruined, he then says, V'zot ashiv elibi al kein ochil. But this is what I shall tell myself, and therefore I will have hope. Chasdei Hashem ki lo tamid. Right? God's mercies are forever. They never stop. Now, what allows a person to say these two things within 2 seconds of each other? Right? So the word that I often use for this is a word that's become very important to me, although it must be a more eloquent way of saying this, is the spiritual importance of capaciousness. Right? Capaciousness. The ability to hold, the capacity to hold one thing and its opposite.
Cognitive dissonance.
But it's not, cognitive dissonance suggests usually that I'm going to adjust my thinking, right? This is actually not about adjusting anything, it's about saying yes. Right? I'm despairing and I'm hoping. Right?
Paradox.
I was mentioning, we were talking about this morning, one of the most amazing passages in all of 20th century Jewish thought, in the beginning of his essay, Majesty and Humility, it's totally not what I was going to talk about, but I think it's particularly to this point. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik says the following. This is almost verbatim. The Judaic dialectic is unlike the Hegelian in that it knows no synthesis. Now, just in normal person's language, right? For German philosophy, you have a statement, the thesis, its opposite, the antithesis, and then you have some kind of synthesis, right? Which is a working out of what the kind of working out of the middle holding. Soloveitchik's argument essentially is that in Judaism, you have a thesis, you have an antithesis, and good luck. Right? That's what he's arguing, right? Hold it. Now, by the way, his example is beautiful, and it's not the one most of us would think of first. His example that he uses to illustrate this is what the essay is really about in many ways, is about how human beings, Sally will appreciate this, human beings, by nature, desperately want to wander and spend their whole life trying to find somewhere they can call home. And it's not one or the other, right? It's just not. If it's one or the other, it's because you've somehow falsified the existential tornness of a human being into two poles, right? Another example of this that I'm not sure that I buy, this is the example I used to use to teach this idea. I'm not totally sure I buy it, I'm happy to talk about why later, but it's useful at least to illustrate is, on the one hand, right, Bishvili Nivra Olam, on the other hand, I'm nothing. Nobody ever said, okay, compromise. Judaism and these people are somewhat valuable. This is not what we do. there's something here about the author of Eicha Perek Gimel saying, you know what? I have lost all hope. God's love is everywhere. And the capacity, and he's not a metaphysician. He does not feel the need to resolve that into a bow. He is not writing a treatise in theology here. He is writing something to enable him to survive, which is different. I am not, Lord knows, discounting the importance of doing theology. But it may very well be that in this day and age, one of the things theology has to do is acknowledge that this may be the best we can do, right? Is to, yeah, with all kinds of reasons to believe, all kinds of reasons not to believe, I'll hold them both, right? So, okay. Well, the reason I brought this just to make a point is, so Malachi Ben is abstract. It's about the history of the Jews. Eicha Perek Gimel is about the person. Maybe the person is a stand-in for the Jewish people, but that doesn't really mitigate the point. It's a person who's able to say, I have every reason to give up, I won't do it. Well, I will give up, but not all the time. Or to put it differently, despair does not have the last word, which crucially means despair does, though, have a word. Right? That, of course, will become extremely important, for example, in Rabbi Nachman. Right? In a totally different idiom with a totally different set of texts, right? Perhaps you'll tell me this is obvious. I'm not sure it is or it isn't, but that's the difference in Likutei Moharan between Atzvut and Shvirat Halev. Atzvut is depression, which is basically I can't even access my despair. Shvirat Halev is about it's totally open, and I'm there. And he says Shvirat Halev is a path to joy. Right? There's no path to Simcha Shvirat Halev. Shvirat Halev is a delightful liberation. Right? Imagine, we need to personalize this for a minute, the thing you've been wanting to cry about for 43 years. And the joy you imagine you would feel if those tears ever came. That's Shvirat Halev.
Ein shalem elev shavua.
Same idea. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now, so the first piece here, how do we wait? We hope. Not delusional hope, not grandiose hope, but hope. Personally and communally. The second thing I want to say is, in some ways, a little bit of a harder sell is protest. Protest at the way the world is. The Midrash, one of the two most well-known midrashim about why God chooses to enter into a relationship with Abraham has often been misinterpreted, at least based on the Hebrew, right? The famous midrash where Abraham is wandering around and sees a building in flames, right? Very often that text is translated, he sees a birah doleket. Doleket in rabbinic Hebrew does not mean lit up. If it was a palace lit up, it would be birah mu'eret. Birah doleket means a building that is in flames. And somehow his cry is the moment that God says, I like you. Something, at least not in that rabbinic midrash, there's something about his willingness to speak up. He stays, he looks, he speaks. I often think that it's a tremendous kind of form of spiritual practice to ask ourselves, when we see something that is intolerable, where does the break happen between stopping, seeing, noticing, speaking? Most of us at some point get stuck before that speaking part. I don't want to seem like a lunatic, right? I don't want to lose all my friends, whatever it might be. By the way, good people can disagree about what does and doesn't constitute injustice. But the fact is, all of us encounter situations where we think that can't be. And I would argue, by the way, for what it's worth, I tried to argue this in print, I'm still not totally convinced I buy this reading myself, but that there's some way in which Avram's protest is itself a realization that he believes in God. Because it's one thing to say, I don't like the way things are. It's a totally different thing to say, this is not the way things are supposed to be. Who says? Based on what? Right? There's some way in which saying this is not how the world is supposed to be is already an acknowledgement that there's another reality by which this world is judged. Which is why Abraham, in that very moment of protest, is actually, consciously or not, inviting God to reveal God's self to him. You're right. I protest, therefore I believe. Which is so different from a lot of us moderns, for whom I protest and therefore I no longer believe. Right? For Abraham, I think he actually discovers God. You know, it's very important, by the way, this is the rabbinic God who's transcendent, because the transcendent God relativizes the way the world is. Right? You don't have the danger of pantheism here, which sanctifies the way the world is, potentially. Potentially. Right? Right? God is not the world is not God. The world is judged by God's standards. Abraham understands that, or sees the world that way. Again, I'm not suggesting he's sitting there thinking like a philosopher, suggesting that this is kind of like an intuition that he has. Peter Berger, great, recently passed away sociologist, had this amazing image that some of you may remember from college. This was once a hugely influential book called A Rumor of Angels. In the book A Rumor of Angels, Berger talks about what he calls signals of transcendence, which are not actually arguments for the existence of God or anything like that. There are moments in human life where people act in a way that suggests that they believe that there's some other reality that compels them. The example of this that I remember, because I remember reading this in college and being so moved by the example, he says, what enables mothers the world over to pick up a crying infant, hold them close and say, it's going to be okay? When in fact, it might well not. I mean, go read the New York. What is a Syrian mother running over and saying, it's going to be okay? It's not going to be okay. So he suggests there, if I recall correctly, that it's going to be okay is a kind of statement of belief. Belief is probably not the right word. Statement of attachment to a different reality that Berger was also a devout Lutheran. He thinks is actually a kind of intuition of God. I brought you here a couple of examples of many. One of the things, in my own life, I basically fell in love with Tanakh in my late 30s. And the reason why is very counterintuitive, I think, because when people ask me about this, why did you kind of abandon 20th century Jewish thought or write about psalmists? It's because I was blown away by their honesty. Meaning, here's what you do not have in the book of Psalms, ever. Gamzula Tova. Ever! Right? You know what, God? This is horrible. And I have enough of a relationship with you and enough trust in my sense of this that I'm going to tell you, I cannot endure this any longer. And there is something about that is utterly courageous. It also requires, I will say, profound faith to be able to do this. To say, I can't take this anymore is very different than, God, I can't take this anymore. One is a description of myself, the other is a relational gesture. It is opening a space between me and God. They're really very different. It's like saying, I love her and I love you. Very different statements, right? Not just you change the word. It's like you fundamentally change the interpersonal space. You write in a fundamental way. You created what Buber wonderfully, as only a German could, calls the between. That's zwischen, right? You created the between, right? You created something that's between us. So in these psalms, you have this amazing belief, okay, I understand that I have to wait. I understand it's not perfect now, but here's what I'm kind of not willing to do. Okay, in my piety, I will sit and I will wait. No, I'm actually going to tell you that it hurts. And also, even more audaciously, and here we would have to, if we had a whole other day, how do people with a whole range of different theological assumptions connect to or fail to connect to texts like this? I'm also pretty disappointed in you. Because the Psalms are amazing in that way. Right? You've let me down. Me being either me or me the Jewish people. Or if you want to go more modern, right, not based on classical texts, right, me the world. You let us down. You're implicated here. Most dramatic example of that, and the amazing rabbinic tradition's way to clean it up, Ki alecha horagnu kol hayom, Psalm 44, often rendered in rabbinic tradition as, for your sake we are killed all day long. It's an enormous statement of piety. It's very moving. Biblical Hebrew, alecha horagnu kol hayom, does not mean for your sake. It means because of you. Because of you, we are killed all day long. What's the story here? How much longer is this going to go on? So there's something there that I think is like enormously courageous, and also, and here I want to sort of suggest this to kind of draw this point even more starkly. There's something about the articulation of despair that itself gives rise to hope. That requires, I myself, I need to sort of flesh that out. We're going to be talking about that more. But there is some profound truth there. I don't think that means every time a person expresses despair, it yields hope. There's something in these Psalms that is free. You see this, I spent a lot of my life talking to kids who went to yeshiva, who got a tremendous amount out of yeshiva, and at some point, something that was really important to them got clobbered. And that feeling of, I have to be quiet, I can't say what hurts, or I can't say what's hard, becomes, right? It's not just yeshivas. I mean, I think families are also a place where this happens all the time, right? Families where kids try to tell the parents, I can't take watching you fight anymore. And then both parents turn on the kid. Right? I mean, this stuff is really painful. There's something about these songs I think are about the liberation of, I'm going to say something.
What?
I'm going to say something. Right? What is it? Is it Psalm 39? Maybe wrong about that. Where Psalms actually says, I tried so hard not to say a bad thing, God. I didn't want to sin. Sorry, I'm going to say it. It's such a poignant paragraph to him. I'm like, no, I'm going to speak here. I also brought you here realizing we weren't going to get to it, but just because I love it so much, I think it's so interesting. The prophet Habakkuk, which is a book I'm sure all of you know by heart. The prophet Habakkuk, the book Sefer Habakkuk is totally different than any other prophetic book. Sefer Habakkuk, 2/3, it's 3 chapters long. The first few chapters are an extended argument between the prophet and God. In which the prophet basically says, I've been screaming for a long time, and I'm not sure what you do. And God then says, in this completely mysterious answer, which I didn't bring here, it's about to get a lot worse, by the way, because the Babylonians are going to come, and they're going to wreak havoc on all these evil Judeans. And then Habakkuk cries out again, and then amazingly he says, God is telling me to wait. And that's, by the way, the basis of the line of waiting for the Mashiach. If you look, I did bring you here, right?
Yeah.
Look at Habakkuk 2:3, page 8. Ki od chazon lamoed, right? Im yitmama chakelo. The afal pishe yitmamea im kozeh chakelo. It's a song about this verse. And then, by the way, for those of you who like this kind of stuff, at the end of verse 4, the single most controversial verse, well, I shouldn't say that, the second most controversial verse in the history of Jewish-Christian polemics, the tzaddik be'emunato yichyeh. Paul takes that to mean the righteous lives by his faith, a belief in certain things. Many traditional Jews read that to mean faithfulness, keeping of the mitzvot, the orienting of life around God. This is, endless. It's kind of fun. If you read more liberal Christian contemporary commentators, they'll all say things like, Paul here somewhat massaged the meaning of what Habakkuk was saying to make his point. Whereas, if you go back hundreds of years, they're all talking about how the Jews didn't understand what Habakkuk was saying. Anyway, but even here you have a prophet who says, I really can't endure this anymore. But then again, that message of wait. So I want to just briefly return to this question, the third question, a third dimension. Right? We talk about hope, we talk about protest, of what waiting consists of, and then stop and we can talk a little. So What does Abba Shaul mean when he says, wait for the king? The Talmud famously tells a story, tells a kind of statement, I guess you'd say, this is source 19, that when a person dies, Rava says, right, when a person comes before court, what do we say? Nasata v'natata ve'emunah, did you deal trustworthily with other humans? Kavata itim laTorah, did you set aside time to learn? Asakta b'piryah v'ridyah, did you, to the best of your ability, right, contribute to the proliferation of humanity? And then, Sipita Yeshua, did you wait for redemption? And the question is, what does it mean to wait for redemption? I would actually prefer the translation, did you anticipate redemption? And you see why in just 1 second. So, I don't know what waiting for redemption means, but I'm pretty confident that it doesn't mean the following. You know, someone pops by your house on a Sunday afternoon, you have your feet on the couch, you're watching football and eating the 3rd bag of potato chips. And the person says, Yankele, what are you doing? And you say, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm waiting for redemption. Right? It is pretty clear to me that that's not what Zikita Yeshua means. Right? But why doesn't it mean that? I mean, why not? Right? We use waiting colloquially to mean things like that all the time. We go, I'm waiting for a bus. I'm waiting for the Messiah. Right? It's clear to me that that's not what waiting consists of. So I want to sort of suggest, you know, given that waiting cannot mean silent, passive waiting, what does it mean? That's why I proposed this translation, did you anticipate redemption? Because I think the word anticipate, the way we use it, can mean one of two things, right? Waiting, but also kind of preparing in a very active way. So this is what I've come to think this statement means, right? Each of us is basically asked, did you create moments of redemption even in the midst of an impossibly broken and unredeemed reality? Right? Did you create pockets of holiness even in a world that is almost unbearably profane? Right? Did you create, go back to that, a dream in which human dignity, a world in which human dignity is real and God's presence is manifest? Did you create a home, or a school, or a classroom, or a work environment, or a city block, or whatever it might be, in which human dignity was genuinely real, even for a brief moment? With the way you carried yourself in the world, were you walking testimony to the fact that this is your dream for how the world should look? V'ani tefilati, right? Like, well, this is my, I am, right? You can tell what a person really values pretty quickly. Usually. I say usually because some people are so battered by life that I think it's hard to be absolutist about that. To go back to our image, did you catch glimmers of the promised land even as you were forced to continue to live in the desert? Did you catch glimmers of the promised land? Or if you prefer, did you create glimmers of the promised land even if you had no choice but to live in the desert? And I'm saying glimmers for a reason here. That cuts against a lot of popular liberal spirituality. I think it's extremely important in all this to understand that human beings are not capable of redeeming the world and are not asked to redeem the world. Human beings are asked to improve the world, not to redeem it. Here's the thing about politics, especially in America. Conservatives are extremely good at reminding people that human beings can't redeem the world. Liberals are very good at not remembering there are limits to what they can accomplish. I myself fall out on one of those sides. I'm not trying to be totally even-handed here. But I do think there's a deep truth there. The only people who really believe that human beings can redeem the world tend to be sophomores. And by the way, I want them to believe that. I want them to believe that because you know what? Life will teach them to be a little more modest. And the danger is that when they stop believing that, they stop believing they can do anything. Right? So this is really careful ground. Right? You tell people, I used to hate that. You know, I was a Hillel rabbi for 3 years at Harvard. And I remember a conversation with the associate dean of the college. To this day, I have to confess, like, makes me like clench up. A bunch of undergrads had taken over the president of Harvard's office because Harvard, with its $30 billion endowment, would not consent to a living wage for the kitchen staff. And I was sitting in the meeting of clergy and the deans. What are we going to do? The students have been in there for days, you know. And one of the deans, well, himself, by the way, was an ordained minister, turns to me and says, these kids are all going to be working at McKinsey in 3 years. They should just get over this. And I said, like, I understand, like, really, like, they're all working at McKinsey. That's your conclusion? Therefore, they should go work at McKinsey now? Right? How about, like, why don't you go say to them, you know what, we're incredibly proud of you. Let's talk. How about, like, right? I was just so, by the way, you can agree with their issue or not, but the response, the sort of cynicism and dismissal of the idealism is just so utterly perverse. That said, it's, you know, the neoconservative Thomas Sowell has this wonderful line. It really is a brilliant comment. He says, what people often forget is that in this world, there are no solutions, there are trade-offs. Right? Think about all of the social policies that you have been behind in your life, and by the way, here's a great example of contemporary social policy, and this is being written about right now in really complicated ways. African American ministers who fought for draconian drug laws because they thought it would clean up their neighborhoods. They were all, I don't want to use the word complicit because I'm not trying to judge anybody. They were all participants in this mass incarceration culture. They tried to solve a problem. They created another one that was bigger. They didn't create it alone, to be sure, right? And it's just a good example of the way this happens all the time. Liberals tend not to think about that. Conservatives tend to think only about that. Now that I've belittled the whole world, we can move on. In some ways, I think that's I would call it the Yetzer Hara of each side, right? The liberal Yetzer Hara is to be overconfident in what it's able to do. The conservative Yetzer Hara is to believe you can't do very much. So Rava, I think, is teaching us something enormously powerful, which is that we cannot redeem the world, but we can anticipate the redemption, right? You can catch glimpses of what a redeemed world can look like. And frankly, however small, you can create moments of what a redeemed world can look like. And to be clear, I am talking here about things like the relationship between you and your spouse and the question of race in America. Meaning I want to talk about small and large at the same time. Because that integration is the dream. One of the things I'm arguing in my next book, some people, I say this to a few people, they think I'm crazy, but I mean this more seriously than I've ever meant anything, right? If you don't see the connection between caring about human rights and holding the door for someone behind you, you are not in this parsha. Right? That is so basic, right? So how do you create moments that anticipate that larger reality without then convincing yourself that the little moments are everything? My kid may be well cared for, but you know what? There are kids all over the world who are anything but well cared for. I'm not done. Now, maybe there was more I want to say, but I want to maybe end with this because I want to hear from people. I totally ruined it in the packet. I made the same mistake that a scribe made, which is hilarious. So, the better manuscripts of Sifra have a different reading of Abba Shaul's statements. And you can correct it in your text if you have a pen. Abba Shaul Omer, Pamaya Lemelech, the king has a retinue. Excuse me. Uma aleh aliyot. What must the retinue do? Mechaka with a kof, lemelech. That is, imitate the king. By the way, the Gemara Masechet Shabbat, it is Abba Shaul who tells you that walking in God's ways is about compassion and mercy. So in a world that seems utterly merciless, where God's mercy seems to have disappeared, that's here. The king's retinue has to do the work that it wishes God would do, but for now it will do. That is the avoda of living in the waiting. The avoda of living in the waiting is not just hoping, and it's not just protesting, it's also about love and compassion and imagining what God's compassion looks like, and to the best of our limited, broken, fragile human abilities, inhabit it. More I want to say, but I'm going to stop. Let's. Thank you. Do I have to give my usual line here that Jews need to be reminded that a question is not a speech followed by "Don't you agree?" you can. I have it in your thoughts. Yeah. I saw so many hands. I don't know how to do this. Elise, you want to go first? Yeah. Yeah. You want to take the microphone? Sorry, like there was about 50 hands. So.
Okay, just take one
Come
side.
here. Yeah. Come on up.
Some people can write and some.
You can pass the microphone. Too.
I can't listen to three things at once.
Okay, he called on me.
Elise, you go first. That's your question. And then we'll give
Oh, so many Elises.
That was what was confusing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Get a new Elise on life.
That's very funny.
Wow.
I actually have two things. One is I was really interested in the readings that you brought from some of the Christian biblical scholars.